What's up, YouTubers and plant lovers? It's Justin coming to you from the Big Blue Nation once again. And today I was going to talk to you about the Zamioculcas, zamiifolia? I believe that's how you pronounce it. It's a doozy. But they call it the ZZ plant for a shorter abbreviation. I've also heard it called the Zanzibar gem as well. But I've always wanted one of these plants. Don't ask me why. I like the big and beautiful. I really do. And they were selling this bad boy at Home Depot. And this is actually a rescue plant. I don't know if you can tell, but it's got some lanky growth on the sides. A lot of stems have dropped a bunch of leaves. There's a bunch of browning going on, and the soil is super saturated. Now these plants are from the tropical areas of about Eastern Africa, I believe. That's not good. So they do not like to have wet feet. But like I was saying, this plant was going for about $24, and they marked it down. They took about $11 off for me, so I had to snatch it up. And I figured, you know, there's not too much to do in the way of rescuing them, but I think I might have bitten off more than I can chew. So be sure to follow along with me, and I'll show you what all needs to be done in order to keep this plant happy, healthy, and thriving. Now, typically with plants, you can give a good squeeze on it around the root ball to loosen the pot up and just pull the plant out. But this plant doesn't really have roots. It has more of rhizomes, kind of big old tubers down in there. And I don't know if you can tell just by the shape of the pot, and it's not having any give to it whatsoever, but this plant is crammed down in there. So I'm probably gonna have to go ahead and cut it out. So I'll just take some scissors, lay it on its side, and get ready to clean up a giant mess. But, yep, I'll just go ahead and cut it out. And don't really worry too much about the rhizomes. If you do cut some of them, it'll be fine. You can cut about 60 to 70% off without actually doing any great harm to the plant. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add several different ingredients into my pot for this plant. I've got some citrus mix from Miracle-Gro, and I've got a bunch of peat moss as well. All this kind of added in there and mixed up will do really well for the plant. And these plants are extremely easy to take care of. A lot of them call them plants of steel, just because they're almost impossible to kill. But as I was saying, you can just kind of mix it up. Even if you've got regular just house plant mix, it'll be just fine for this plant. They're not too picky, though they do like soil that drains relatively easy. So anything with some kind of sand in there to kind of help the water drain is going to be ideal for this plant. And just like I was saying, you just want to kind of cut the plant out. Now I'm going to try my hardest to save just a little bit of this dirt, just because the added micronutrients that are in there will kind of help the plant out. And as you can tell, these roots or rhizomes, they're a pretty hefty bunch. So they will add a lot of weight to the plant. So you need to be prepared for that, especially when you're picking out a new pot for this plant. You don't want something that's going to be really heavy and bulky, because that's just going to add more unwanted weight, especially if you want to move it in and outdoors during the summertime. Now, and especially if you keep it outdoors in the summertime, you want to keep it in a shaded area. Now this plant is from the tropical regions of about Eastern Africa, but they don't like a whole bunch of direct light. They do well in the shade. And indoors, if you're going to keep it indoors, you need probably an eastern or western facing window. But if you use a southern facing window, they really will take off, but they do need some protection. So make sure that you give them kind of dappled light there. Alright, I got the plant set up about right where I want it to be. now that I've added all the soil that I want, this plant looks a little bit better. As I was saying earlier, there's a bit of lanky growth where some etiolation has occurred, but this plant is a beast. It'll continue to grow just fine as long as you give it adequate light during the day. You can go weeks, if not months, without watering this plant. Like I was saying, it doesn't like wet feet, so do not leave the soil saturated. The only time that it needs to be anywhere saturated is when you water it just once. Probably in the summertime, I would water it at most once a week. Do give it a thorough watering. Make sure that your pot has plenty of drainage holes at the bottom and that any excess water can drain out the bottom. And with the light, as I was saying, you want to make sure that it does receive kind of bright indirect light, no direct sun whatsoever. Temperatures, you want to make sure that at nighttime or even during the day this plant never experiences weather below 55 degrees. I suppose you could get away with 50 if it were only just for a couple of days, but this plant does not like it to be too cold at all. It does not need really any kind of humidity as well, no misting or anything like that. So inside, just make sure that you have it kind of away from any kind of heating source like a radiator or heater or anything like that, because that will make it drop its leaves. And as you can tell, these leaves are kind of the selling point of the plant. They've got beautiful, they kind of almost look like a succulent with the kind of waxy dark green leaves. This plant can get about 3 feet tall, maybe a little bit taller if it's well taken care of, but about 3 feet, 3.5 feet is the limit. Now, since I've just recently potted this, any kind of dead leaves on here, I'm just going to go ahead and cut where the dead area is and cut that off. That'll ensure that the plant isn't wasting valuable resources and nutrients on any kind of dead or dying leaf or stems. And as I was saying with the light, it will be fine in a low light condition. In fact, if you have an area that doesn't receive hardly any light at all, this plant will be pretty ideal for that location. But just because it can do well in low light doesn't mean it really necessarily has to be. If you do have it in a well kind of bright indirect light, this plant really will take off and get rather big kind of quickly too. Now, propagating this plant, you can cut a leaf off and you just want to cut it down below the node, leave just a little kind of stem like that, and then you can just place it in the soil, just lay it on top, and these leaves will start to grow rootlets. Now you will be able to produce a whole new plant just from the leaves, but one of the easier ways to propagate this plant is when you go to repot it, you can take a spade, a rather sharp spade, and kind of split it down the center and split the plant in two. And then you can kind of repot those two plants and you'll have two adequate plants that will last a long time. Don't worry about kind of hurting any kind of stems or roots, because any kind of damage that you do, the plant will recover, just as long as you kind of take a plant of this size, larger, maybe just a little bit smaller, and just kind of divide it right down the middle. Now you will break off a couple of stems, leaves, and some rootlets, but like I said, that's okay. Now this plant isn't really toxic. It does contain sharp kind of micro calcium oxalate, I believe that's how you pronounce it, but that is a mild irritant. So if you have really sensitive skin, you might want to wear gloves while handling this plant or repotting it. If not, you do certainly want to wash your hands afterwards, because if you touch this plant and get any kind of a sap or anything on your hands and get it in your eyes or mouth, you can kind of develop a rash, or it will start kind of burning or hurting. If you do have pets or children and they ingest one of these leaves, it won't kill them, but it might teach them not to stick things in their mouth, because it can cause an upset stomach and maybe hurt them for a little bit. But other than that, this plant is a really good plant to have. Like I was saying, if you have low light conditions, this plant is ideal, and it will last a very, very, very long time. Well guys, that's pretty much all I have to say about the ZZ plant. Let me know if you all ever had any, if you've had any kind of luck with this plant, And be sure to hit the like button. And while you're at it, hit the subscribe button too, and hit the button next to it. That way you'll be alerted anytime that I've uploaded a new video. Alright guys, you all have a good one. And as always, make sure you do plant prudently. Thank you, YouTube.